chocolate raspberry. Ladies and gentlemen, often imitated, never quite duplicated. You can use the name to try to promo whatever you want, but at the end of the day, there's one man that lives that Bridgewater's finest life day in and day out, and you're looking at him. What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and we are back for Season 6 of my weekly CFL Football Picks Show for the 2024 CFL regular season, which is just a scant few days away. I could not be more excited to be back here for the 6th time talking about the Canadian Football League. Seems like the little football league that could, but every year we come back stronger and better than ever. I love this league. I love Canadian football. I know you've got a passion for it too, or else you would not be here. This is my season preview for 2024 and my picks for week 1. Before we get started, as always, stick taps and a tip of the hat to my boys in the CFL group chat on Twitter. You guys are the best. I'm so happy to be back here crushing this 2024 CFL season right alongside you guys. And as we did last year, we are of course paying homage to our reigning defending Grey Cup champions, the Montreal Alouettes, who really dominated the second half of that Grey Cup back in November, I believe it was. Got the win over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Montreal defending the Grey Cup coming into the 2024 season. And speaking of, that's where we begin with our season preview here for 2024. We take a look back at the final standings, how I would have power ranked the teams coming out of 2023. And then we're going to talk about what was a fairly busy off season in the CFL before we get into my power rankings heading into week 1 for 2024 and talk about the 4-game slate for week 1. So we take a look at the final standings coming out of 2023, and this is basically exactly how I would have power ranked the league coming out of the 2023 season. We got the Montreal Alouettes up top there, having won the Grey Cup. I wouldn't say they were the best roster top to bottom. They might have been like 4th, but look, you got to give it up to the team that won the thing. So we start off with Montreal at the top. They beat Winnipeg in the Grey Cup, so we're going to have Winnipeg number 2. I have the Toronto Argos number 3, the BC Lions number 4, Hamilton number 5, Calgary number 6, Saskatchewan number 7, Ottawa number 8, and Edmonton bringing up the rear end of the league at number 9. But once again, that's just coming out of the end of last season. We've had multiple entry drafts, we've had free agency, we've had coaching changes, and that's actually where I'd like to start. I didn't talk about this in the season preview last year, but a couple of, I think, fairly significant coaching changes took place over the course of this offseason in the CFL that I'd like to talk about. The big one coming in Saskatchewan. Corey Mace taking over as the head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He was, of course, the defensive coordinator in Toronto for a couple of really, really solid seasons with that Toronto defense. I'm not a Riders fan. I don't really have a team allegiance, but I'm giddy for what we could see out of the Saskatchewan Roughriders defense in 2024 with Corey Mace as the head coach of this team. I think it is a big plus for that Riders defense, which, as we're going to talk about, is kind of heading into a new era of their defense. So I love the prospects of a guy like Corey Mace being at the head of that team. That whole team almost has basically been remade. Offensive pieces, defensive pieces. It's going to be fun to watch. We had a bit of a lateral move in the East Division. We had Tommy Condell coming over to Ottawa to be their new offensive coordinator, was previously the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach in Hamilton. So kind of remains to be seen what kind of an impact that's going to have on the Red Blacks offensively. Speaking of Hamilton, though, they had the other big head coaching hire from this past offseason. That is Scott Milanovich coming over. Obviously has a ton of CFL experience, assistant coordinator, as well as a quarterbacks coach at the NFL level. So Scott Milanovich comes over, takes over the head coaching position in Hamilton. It's one that makes me very excited because, look, if you've been watching this show over the last couple of years, you know I've been pretty critical of Orlando Steinauer as a head coach in Hamilton. And as tends to happen in corporations, which is basically what sports franchises are, you just kind of fail upward. So Orlando Steinauer goes into the front office and Scott Milanovic steps in and takes over as head coach. I think this is a boon for the Hamilton Ticats, certainly on the offensive side. I think that offense is going to look totally different. Could be the key to unlocking some of those other, not necessarily the superstars, but the depth offensive pieces down the roster. I think Scott Milanovic is going to go a long way to that, and his pedigree as a quarterbacks coach in the NFL is going to be very, very helpful with this Hamilton quarterback room. I talked a minute ago about how this is kind of a new era for the Saskatchewan Riders on the defensive side. The main reason for that, a couple of really notable retirements coming out of Saskatchewan: Charleston Hughes and Larry Dean. Obviously, Charleston Hughes on the D-line, Larry Dean as a linebacker. Two guys that I think really embodied the culture of Riders defense and the kind of defense the Riders wanted to play. Neither one of those guys are there now. So neither one of those guys are going to be in that room week in and week out, practices day in and day out. It's a changing of the guard and a changing of the culture, which I would be worried about if they wouldn't have brought over a guy like Corey Mace. I think Corey Mace is going to come over and instill his culture, his way of playing defense. I think it's going to be a smoother transition, but look, there's no denying that, like, you're losing two big pieces on the defensive side there if you're Saskatchewan. Obviously, Andrew Harris, one of the other really notable retirements from the offseason, signed a one-day contract to retire as a Winnipeg Blue Bomber. Manny Arsenault also calling it a career in the offseason, and he put himself together a pretty darn impressive CFL career. So Manny Arsenault and Andrew Harris also calling it quits this offseason. Also, a couple of really notable injuries and suspension, which we'll talk about at the end, but a couple of really notable injuries coming into the beginning of this season. The ones that really stick out: Adam Bighill for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at linebacker. He's still dealing with that calf injury that basically cost him, all of last season, or basically all of last season. Still seems to be dealing with it. I think he's on the 6th game right now, so I mean, who knows when we might see him to start the year. And Malik Henry injuring his knee, substantially injuring his knee a few weeks back. He is unfortunately done for the season, and that's just one in a laundry list of problems for the Calgary Stampeders, which we are going to get into. Devontae Dedmon, running back for Ottawa, he, I think, tore his Achilles, so I believe he's out for the season as well. Certainly can be a playmaker on the offensive side as well as in special teams. Ottawa will not have that available to them this year. And then, of course, the storyline that dominated CFL storylines in the offseason, which is Toronto Argonauts quarterback Chad Kelly, suspended for at least the first 9 games of this season. So that's going to be like that quarterback question mark there in Toronto. Is it going to be Cameron Dukes? Is it going to be Nick Arbuckle? Like, definite question marks there heading into the season for the Argos. I wanted to take the time now as well to look at some of the notable free agency and player moves that we did see in the offseason. A lot of high-impact, top-end talent in new places heading into 2024, which I believe has kind of shifted, I kind of said this last year too, shifted some of the balance of power in this league. Right at the top, one of the early ones, Drew Brown, backup quarterback for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He moves over to Ottawa, presumably to at least compete for the starting quarterback position in Ottawa. I believe Dustin Crum might be injured to start the season, so I'm quite confident in the idea of Drew Brown getting, an extended look here as the new number 1. That's, I think, a plus for the Ottawa offense. I think Drew Brown getting to sit behind and kind of contribute here and there with a guy like Zach Collaros and that Winnipeg Blue Bombers culture, I think he's going to do good things in Ottawa. Dominique Rhymes, one of the real probably one of the top 10 receivers in the CFL. He makes a move from the BC Lions also to the Ottawa REDBLACKS. So Ottawa, a big plus on the offensive side there, getting one of the dominant offensive weapons in the CFL, now available to them in their receiving core in Dominique Rhymes. Ottawa building themselves a nice little receiving lineup there. William Stanback, another early free agency decision. He changes divisions, going from Montreal to the BC Lions. Obviously, this is a drop down for the Alouettes offensively and a pickup for the BC Lions offensively. But again, with the way those two teams kind of do their run games, I don't think it's as massive of a deal maybe as it looks like on paper. The BC Lions are not a team that's predicated on running the football a ton, and Montreal for the last couple of years has been running back by committee. So it's noticeable. Like, it's a noticeable change. I just don't think it's like seismic necessarily. One that is seismic, AJ Ouellette, also changing divisions, going from the Toronto Argos to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. A big plus for the Riders offensively to get a guy like AJ Ouellette, a dual threat, do-it-all running back. The CFL's answer to Christian McCaffrey, I suppose, but a guy who's a very deadly receiver, runs the ball very, very well. I believe he had more than 1,000 yards rushing last year. AJ Ouellette is a machine back there. Big pickup for the Riders, big loss for the Argos. Demario Houston, defensive back, leaving Winnipeg, staying in the division though and going to Calgary. So this, I think, is like a two checks for Calgary on the defensive side. Demario Houston, one of the elite D-backs in the CFL. Winnipeg, I think, will be able to absorb that in their secondary. It's definitely a loss, but it's a bigger gain to Calgary than it is loss to Winnipeg. Couple more offensive pieces, one leaving Saskatchewan, one coming in. Tevin Jones making the move from the Riders to the Montreal Alouettes at wide receiver, so that's a plus in the Alouettes column on the offensive side. However, a big plus for the Riders, bringing over offensive lineman Jamarcus Hardrick from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Once again, I believe the Bombers will probably be able to absorb that on their offensive line, but what have we talked about for the Riders for the last 2 years? The quality and caliber of the offensive line. They directly addressed that, bringing over a guy with a name and a ton of talent on the offensive line in Jamarcus Hardrick. That's a big plus for this Riders team that I think is going to be a little more predicated on running the football in 2024. You need that O-line. You need him to be solid. That's a great move, I think, for the Riders. Had some defensive moves in there too. Jameer Thurman at linebacker, leaving the Hamilton Ticats to join the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So once again, a little bit of a negative on Hamilton's side and a positive to Saskatchewan. Couple of big pieces, two defensive talents going from the Toronto Argos to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So that is Jamal Peters and Dwayne Hendricks. Jamal Peters, obviously one of the elite defensive backs in the CFL. Dwayne Hendricks on the D-line. They both go from Toronto to Hamilton. That is a big upgrade. The Argos did quite a bit of work this offseason, bringing in offensive weapons. I'm assuming trying to mitigate some of that loss that they're going to have from not having Chad Kelly for basically the first half of the season. They bring in running back Kadeem Carey from Calgary. They bring in wide receiver Rashid Bailey, formerly from Winnipeg. And they also, from Winnipeg, bring in wide receiver and kick returner Janarian Grant. So that's three big pieces, big offensive pieces that Toronto can try to use with whoever's going to be at quarterback. And I think it might be a little bit of a carousel this year, at least for the first half. But bringing in those offensive pieces to kind of surround whoever it is at quarterback and try to mitigate the drop in output you get from Chad Kelly to whoever happens to be in there. That's three solid signings for the Toronto Argos. I mentioned the Calgary Stampeders losing Kadeem Carey. They also lost Luther Hakunavanu, who I've been a big fan of over the last couple of years. Hakunavanu taking his talents to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Another addition there for Hamilton, this time on the offensive side. Obviously looking for a little bit more opportunity there is Hakunavanu. Again, I've been a big fan. He's a big guy. He's tall. He's 6'4" or 6'5". He's a big red zone threat, and I think Hamilton will certainly make good use of him this season. Speaking of Hamilton, they also pick up an elite option on the defensive line with David Menard coming over from the BC Lions. That is an upgrade and a fairly significant one, I think, for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Definitely a loss for the BC Lions in terms of their pass rush, but one that they mitigated by bringing over a hometown talent, a homegrown talent from down south from the NFL, Christian Covington of Los Angeles Chargers fame, coming back to Canada, coming and signing in the CFL with the BC Lions, looking to continue his pro career. Obviously, they're looking for a replacement there for David Menard, and Christian Covington coming in, I think he brings in a very specific and unique skill set to the BC Lions. I really like that signing for them. Stephen Dunbar returning to the Hamilton Ticats after having a cup of coffee in Edmonton with the Elks. Dunbar goes back to Hamilton. That is a big plus for the Hamilton Ticats on the offensive side. I don't necessarily know that Edmonton used Dunbar to his fullest. Hamilton has experience doing just that. Dunbar has been an elite option for the Ticats when he's been there. I think this is a big upgrade for them. And obviously the other big rejoining to the CFL is McLeod Bethel Thompson. He comes over from leading the USFL in passing yards in 2023, comes back to Canada, signs with the Edmonton Elks. That is a plus for them on the offensive side, but where does that leave Trey Ford? So, in saying all that, here's my very humble opinion. I picked one team, both offensively and defensively, that I feel improved the most and improved the least or got actively worse in this offseason. Last year, I think I did like top 3 or something. That just felt a little messy to me. So I picked one team here that I think is the most and least improved from 2023 on the offensive and defensive sides. We'll start offensively. I think the most improved team offensively is the Ottawa REDBLACKS. Just that combination of bringing in Drew Brown and Dominique Rhymes. Dominique Rhymes becomes the alpha number 1 receiver in a receiving room that also still has Jalen Acklin and still has talented receivers in Ottawa, but you bring in that big number 1 X-receiver type guy, it changes the entire context of that REDBLACKS offense. So I think they're the most improved offense. The least improved, I've got to say it's the Calgary Stampeders, and this is going to sound like rehash from last year. Kadeem Carey out the door, Luther Hakunavanu out the door, and no significant offensive signings as far as I'm concerned anyway, real significant, needle mover offensive signings for the Calgary Stampeders. And this is the second offseason in a row that I've talked about the Calgary Stampeders basically only losing and not really bringing any talent in to replace, or not bringing in needle moving talent to replace the needle moving talent that's heading out the door. And again, you combine that with Malik Henry now being out for the whole year. Buddy. All right. Defensive side now. On defense, I think the most improved team is probably the Hamilton Tiger Cats. You're talking about Jamal Peters coming in, Hendricks coming in. They bring in David Menard from BC. I gave a lot of thought here to the Saskatchewan Roughriders simply because of that new influence of Corey Mace. Obviously, I'm giving a ton of flowers to Corey Mace at the beginning of this, but I'm going to go with Hamilton because I think they brought in the biggest game-breaking pieces on the defensive side. And the least, it's going to directly relate to that, it's the Toronto Argos. They lose Jamal Peters. They lose Hendricks. They lose Corey Mace as the defensive coordinator. I think that Argos defense is still very good and can be very good and will steal some games. But as it sits right now, I feel like they lost the most and became actively worse in this offseason. In saying all of that, here are my 2024 opening week power rankings. This is how I power rank the league heading into week 1. And as an added bonus, like I did last year, I'm going to give you every team's Grey Cup odds and odds to win their division. So we're going to start at the bottom here. I don't think the Edmonton Elks did enough to kind of pick themselves out of power ranking them, at least right now, at the bottom of the league. McLeod Bethel Thompson is definitely a good add, but if that delays Trey Ford, it kind of mitigates some of that plus, I think. So I'm going to keep Edmonton at number 9 in terms of the power rankings. You can get them at plus 1,600 right now to win the Grey Cup. Not the longest odds. Interesting. Plus 1,600 to win the Grey Cup or plus 1,100 to win the West Division. Number 8, I'm going to go with the Calgary Stampeders. I've got them dropping 2 places from where I power ranked them at the end of 2023. Once again, second straight off season where they lost some significant pieces, and other than bringing in Demario Houston, didn't really bring anybody else in. So I'm going to drop them. They have the same odds as the Edmonton Elks, plus 1,600 to win the Grey Cup, plus 1,100 to win the West Division. Not going to like this. The Toronto Argonauts. I have them tumbling 4 places in the power rankings from number 3 all the way down to number 7. Obviously, big losses for them, especially on the defensive side. They did bring in some offensive pieces, but they're not going to have their starting quarterback. What is this Argos team actually going to look like this year? But look, if you're a believer, if you've got faith, plus 550 to win the Grey Cup, plus 300 to win the East Division, your odds are there. Number 6, I'm going to put the Ottawa REDBLACKS. I think they did some good things in this offseason. They didn't really lose a lot of significant pieces on either side of the football. I think they only got better. But right now, they have the longest odds to win the Grey Cup. They're at plus 2,000 odds to win the Grey Cup and plus 950 to win the East. So obviously, the bookmakers, the line makers, are considering this to be another terrible season in Ottawa. I think they might surprise some people. Number 5 in the power rankings are the Saskatchewan Roughriders. That increases 1 spot over where they finished for me in 2023. Again, Corey Mace is the new head coach, bringing in new pieces on both sides of the football, offensively and defensively, ideally getting Trevor Harris back for a full season, improving the offensive line. I think Saskatchewan's a team on the rise. You can get them at plus 1,200 to win the Grey Cup or plus 750 to win the West Division. Number 4, we're going to go with the Hamilton Ticats. That is an increase of 1 spot as well from where they were last season. Obviously, we've talked about the big pieces that they have brought in. Again, second straight off season that the Hamilton Ticats, I think, have significantly improved their roster in the off season. They are currently plus 800 to win the Grey Cup and plus 225 to win the East Division. Number 3, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. A lot of turnover this year. Again, I think it's turnover that their culture and their depth will be able to mitigate. This is still a very good team. This is still arguably one of the teams to beat in the West Division and in the CFL as a whole. But right now, I've been more impressed with a couple of other teams. So, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I have them dropping 1 spot in the power rankings to number 3. They are currently the shortest odds to win the Grey Cup at plus 200, and they're actually minus money to win the West. The season hasn't even started, and they are minus 130 to win the West Division. Like, I understand it's just the division, but I mean, to be minus money before the season even started, especially in the West, I don't like that. Number 2 on my power rankings are the BC Lions. I think they've significantly improved that football team. I think the losses that they had, they have replaced with, with the exception of like Dominique Rhymes. How do you replace Dominique Rhymes? But I feel like that's another one of these teams that's on the rise, and they're going to hit their apex in 2024. I've got them power ranked at number 2, an increase of 2 spots. They are currently plus 550 to win the Grey Cup or plus 300 to win the West Division, which of course means the Kings stay the Kings, and I'm going to keep the Montreal Alouettes at the top of the power rankings despite the fact they did lose in the offseason. I don't necessarily know that this roster is as good as it was last year, but look, I'm giving them the credit and giving them the flowers that they won the Grey Cup last year, and until somebody proves otherwise, they are the team to beat in this league. So we're going to keep the Alouettes number 1 in the power rankings, plus 500 to win the Grey Cup and plus 130 to win the East Division. Reminder, the Alouettes came into last year plus 1,200 to win the Grey Cup. Or, if you will, exactly the odds that the Saskatchewan Roughriders currently have. Now, he asked me to do this for him last year, a treat to my boy Broken Ankle on Twitter. I am going to give you just a couple of other things. I'm going to give you my favorite win total plays in each division. I've got one in the East and one in the West in terms of, again, win totals. These are lines that have been set by Sports Interaction. They also gave me the odds for Grey Cup and winning the division. And then just make some predictions on who I think is going to lead the league in passing, rushing, receiving, and who's going to win most outstanding player. I probably should have done win total projections for the whole league, because looking back on my projections from last year, I went 7-2. Like, I correctly predicted the over-under for 7 of the 9 teams on their win totals last year. I would have made so much money if I would have put money on those. Like, that would have been a quite a tasty little payday if I would have had the forethought to do that. But I've just got one that I really, really like here in each division. So why don't we start with the East Division, because clearly that's what my brain wanted me to do. The Hamilton Ticats, their win total is set at 8.5. This is a team that I think got better over the offseason, added some pieces that make them better, a new head coach that I think is going to make them better, and their win total is 2 fewer than it was last year. So I understand that they obviously fell well short of last year's projection, which is what results in this line, but I really like the over here. Over 8.5 wins for the Hamilton Ticats in 2024. You get that. It's a little minus money. There's a little bit of juice on it at minus 115, but that's okay. Over 8.5, no problem with that whatsoever. This to me is easily a 500 football team. And in the West Division, it's the Calgary Stampeders. Their line is set at 6.5. Under. I think this is the year that the bottom falls out for the Calgary Stampeders. You can't have multiple off seasons where you don't bring anybody in. Like, Stamps fans might have thought that last year's 6-win campaign was as bad as it can get. That is not the case. Ask Edmonton. Ask Ottawa. It's not as bad as it can get, folks. Under 6.5 wins for the Calgary Stampeders in 2024, and I can get that at plus money. It is plus 105 on Sports Interaction. I'm all for that. And a couple of quick hit predictions here for you before we get in to the week 1 picks. Again, I'm going to predict league leaders in passing, rushing, receiving, and my MOP pick for the start of the 2024 season. I think Vernon Adams is going to be our league leader in passing yards this year. Zach Collaros obviously is going to be the popular pick here, both in terms of passing yards, probably in MOP odds as well. But I really like what this BC Lions offense is going to look like, even without Dominique Rhymes. I think they have the depth of receiver that this is just an air raid offense. This is just go, 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 go. And then you got a guy back there in William Stanback where if they want to run the ball, Stanback's still got quite a bit of juice in him. They don't have Taquan Mazzell in BC anymore, but I really like the prospects of Vernon Adams having a monster season, big play VA indeed, and leading the CFL in passing yards. Rushing yards, how do you take anybody that's not Brady Oliveira? I mean, 1,500 yards rushing last year, I believe it was. I see no reason why Oliveira doesn't repeat that performance and probably handily lead the league in rush yards in 2024. Receiving yards, I'm going to go Dalton Schoen. Like, Vernon Adams doesn't have that big number 1 receiver anymore, and I took Dominique Rhymes to lead the league in receiving yards last year. I think it's Dalton Schoen. I think he is head and shoulders like the Julian Edelman of that offense in Winnipeg. High volume. I think he winds up leading the league in receiving yards in 2024. And I'm just going to go ahead and take Vernon Adams as my early season candidate for most outstanding player. I think if he leads the league in passing yards, he's probably pretty darn close on touchdown passes too. I think BC probably makes a deep run through the playoffs, maybe goes to the Grey Cup. Vernon Adams is my preseason choice, my pre-week 1 choice for most outstanding player in the CFL in 2024. They don't sponsor me anymore because they don't exist anymore. But Nerd Tees, I love you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the Week 1 predictions 2024 CFL season, which will include my CFL fantasy roster for Week 1 of this season. So last year, if you'll remember, I did a separate video on how to play CFL fantasy because It had a pretty seismic change to it. There's been no change this year. The game operates exactly the same way as it did last year. So I will link that video that I did last year, how to play CFL Fantasy. That's going to be linked down in the description down below. So if you want a refresher on how the CFL Fantasy game works for 2024, that video will be down below. And my CFL Fantasy team will come at the end of the episode. We're going to preview our 4-game slate here in week 1, and I have one burning question for each of our 4 games. The 4-game slate in week 1 looks like this. The Montreal Alouettes travel to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers, a week 1 Grey Cup rematch, this time taking place in Winnipeg. The Hamilton Ticats travel to Calgary to take on the Stampeders. Saskatchewan is in Edmonton taking on the Elks, and the BC Lions are in Toronto taking on the Argos, with the REDBLACKS having the opening week bye. So, Montreal and Winnipeg. Montreal traveling to Winnipeg to play in Manitoba. My one burning question for this game. The Bombers obviously made a lot of key re-signings in the offseason. They brought back Brady Oliveira on a 2-year deal. They brought back Dalton Schoen. They brought back a number of really key pieces to their team. But they also did lose multiple pieces in what was a relatively quiet signing off season for them. Like, they lost Demario Houston. They lost Hardrick on the offensive line. They lost Rashid Bailey. They lost Janarian Grant on special teams. Does this finally start catching up to them is my burning question. I don't know whether it will necessarily in week 1, but whether these losses, and they had some losses in the offseason last year as well. When does this finally start catching up to them? And when do we finally start seeing the Bombers' window start to close a little bit? That's my burning question heading into the season, heading into week 1. In terms of this game in Montreal, it is so hard to go into Winnipeg and win. I'm going to be on the Bombers in this one. Again, I know I power ranked Montreal number 1, but that doesn't mean the team at number 1 can't lose, especially to a team that's also in the top 3. It's just so hard to go to Winnipeg and win. Let's take the Bombers straight up to beat the Montreal Alouettes in week 1. On the line, Winnipeg is favored by a full 7 points, -7 against the spread. I just think that's too many points. Again, this is, I don't know, they say that momentum doesn't carry forward from game to game. Feelings of revenge games certainly do. So, I mean, Winnipeg could come out and absolutely blow the roof off this game. I just don't see that necessarily happening. So I'm going to take the +7 on the Alouettes. It's possible that Montreal wins this game, obviously. 7 points just feels like too many for me, especially where I think this is a low-scoring game. And week 1 tends to be historically a relatively low-scoring week. So give me the under on the 48-point total in this game. I'm going to go 24-20. In favor of Winnipeg. Maybe this is a Montreal backdoor cover. This could be like 24-13 late in the game, or 24-14 or something late in the game. Montreal gets a late score and kind of backdoor covers this +7. I can certainly see that being a thing that happens. Give me the Bombers straight up, but give me the +7 points on Montreal and under the 48-point total. Hamilton in Calgary, Ticats taking on the Stampeders. My one burning question here, you can probably guess it. This is a second straight off season where, in my opinion, the Calgary Stampeders got significantly worse. And the second straight off season where, in my opinion, the Hamilton Ticats got significantly better. And I kind of telegraphed this a little bit earlier. Is this the season where the bottom falls out in Calgary? My personal opinion is that yes, it is. I don't think last year was as bad as it can get for Calgary. I don't think last year is as bad as it's going to get for Calgary. So give me the Hamilton Ticats here in a big way. The Ticats are only favored by a single point in this game, so I am more than happy to take the -1 on the Hamilton Ticats, who I think are significantly the better football team. And I'm going to take the over on the point total here. It's 47 points, but I think this Ticats offense, again, under Scott Milanovic, is going to come right out of the gates here at the beginning of the year and show us something special. Whether it's Taylor Powell at quarterback or it's Bo Levi Mitchell. They just signed Taylor Powell to a 2-year deal. 2-year extension, I believe, on his deal through 2026. So they've obviously invested in him as a quarterback. They've still got Bo Levi Mitchell there. We'll see who starts week 1. But regardless, they've got so many weapons now on both sides of the football. I love this matchup for them here in week 1. Give me the over on the 47-point total. Let's double them up. Let's go 34-17 in favor of the Ticats. I feel really good about Hamilton this year, but definitely feel good about them this week. The Riders in Edmonton taking on the Elks. My one burning question here in this game. This is kind of a showdown at the OK Corral matchup between two old gunslinger quarterbacks, Trevor Harris and McLeod Bethel-Thompson. We assume will be the guys getting the starts for those two teams. But with this revamped Riders defense, once again, giving my flowers to Corey Mace, this revamped Riders defense, does it feel to anybody else like the wrong team is the favorite here? The Edmonton Elks are favored by 2.5 points in this game. That feels like the wrong team is the favorite. It really does. I think Saskatchewan is a measurably better football team than Edmonton. So even if you give Edmonton the 3-point bump for playing at home, which any Elks fan will be like, why would you give us any credit for playing at home? We went like 2 full years without winning a home game. I just don't feel like they should be the favorites in this game. I feel like Saskatchewan should be a marginal favorite, maybe not -2.5, but should be a marginal favorite in this game. As it stands, I love the upset here. I'm definitely all over the Saskatchewan Roughriders to win this football game in Edmonton. Give me the +2.5, obviously. I'm going to stay under on this point total. The point total is 46.5. It's a pretty beatable number, but it's week 1. Teams don't tend to score a ton of points in week 1. If you look at like the averages per game over the last 3 years, 2 of those 3 years, it's like under 44 points. So I still feel an under in this one. I'm going to go like 26-17 for Saskatchewan. So give me like 43 points. Fairly solid under on the 46.5. Riders win the game outright. Give me the +2.5. And the BC Lions in Toronto taking on the Argos. Obviously, you know where my one burning question is coming from for this game. Lots of losses for this Argos roster. And let me make something perfectly clear for Argos fans. Every week, about Monday evening, Tuesday morning, there's going to be an article or a tweet or something saying what's to be done with the quarterback position. I don't have anything against Dukes. Nick Arbuckle is not a CFL quarterback. He has proven over his last few stints in the CFL seasons, he's not a starting caliber CFL quarterback. So any little fumble from Dukes that causes them to turn to Arbuckle, it's fait accompli. This is, maybe I'm being too rough on the guy. Look, I don't #play the game. He's a better quarterback than me, but I'm just some dude on YouTube. So like, that's how the next 9 weeks, this is going to be a Dukes or Arbuckle carousel for 9 weeks. And it's going to suck. It's going to suck to have these conversations week in and week out. Maybe Dukes proves me wrong. My big question is, how many games can the defense for the Argos steal? This is still a very good defense. Just because Corey Mace isn't there anymore, just because the pieces that they had weren't there anymore, this is still a defense with a lot of talent and a lot of good pieces on it. So how many games, especially in that first 9-game stretch, how many games can the defense kind of keep close and maybe steal? Do I think that's going to happen this week? Not a chance. So I'm all over the BC Lions in this matchup this week. The BC Lions, they're getting -5.5 on the road in Toronto, and I think they cover that. I think they cover that fairly comfortably. So give me the BC Lions to win this game big. Give me the -5.5 fairly comfortably under a touchdown. I'm happy with that. I will stay under the 47.5 point total because I don't know what I'm going to get from the Argos on the offensive side of the football. So I'm going to go like 31-13 for the BC Lions here. I think this is a very comfortable win, the big blowout. Well, one of the big blowouts of this week. I guess Hamilton's another one there as well. But I feel really good about the BC Lions winning this game pretty comfortably. 31-13. Lions win. Lions cover the -5.5 and give me the under on the 47.5 point total. There you go, folks. Those are your picks for week 1 action in the CFL. We'll give them to you here one more time. I got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home beating the Montreal Alouettes 24-20, which means I am taking +7 on the Alouettes and under the 48 point total. I got the Hamilton Ticats in Calgary beating the Stampeders, doubling them up 34-17. Give me the -1 on the Ticats and the over on the 47 point total. Give me the Saskatchewan Roughriders 26-17 in Edmonton over the Elks. Give me the +2.5 on the Riders. Again, I think the wrong team is the favorite there. And under on the 46.5 point total. And give me a 31-13 final for the BC Lions in Toronto over the Argos, with the Lions covering -5.5 and under on the 47.5 point total. Only one thing left to do here, ladies and gentlemen, and that is to give you my CFL fantasy roster for week 1 of 2024. And that is right in front of your eyes right now. And you will see I am not single, double, or triple. I am quad stacking Saskatchewan Roughriders. Let's take a look at this new Riders offense here in week 1. We're going to have Trevor Harris at quarterback, AJ Ouellette at running back, Kyan Schaefer-Baker as one of my wide receivers, a real value play there at $7,000. And then Jareth Stearns, who, again, another guy that was a good value play for me in fantasy last year. So look, 2 wide receivers there in Saskatchewan for a total of $12,000. As a reminder, you only get a $70,000 budget every week. Again, if you want a refresher on how to play CFL fantasy, check the video that is linked down in the description. We got Harris for $12K, AJO for $11.9. We've got James Butler, running back for the Hamilton Ticats, at $12,500. Actually, the most expensive asset that I have in fantasy this week. We're going to pair KSB with Dalton Schoen from Winnipeg for $12,000. And I'm going to take the Hamilton Ticats on defense, a little bit of a value play, relatively inexpensive at $7.8K, which did allow me to kind of go a little extra ham, especially at the running back position. And I think that's really going to pay off dividends for me here in week 1. We back, baby. We back and we ain't going nowhere. CFL 2024, the week 1 episode, the season preview is now in the books. What do you think is going to happen this season? How do you see the 2024 CFL season going? What do you think of the picks for week 1? Who do you have winning these games? Who's covering the spreads? How's the total going, over and under? What do you think of anything and everything that I've presented in this episode? Or damn it, are you just happy to have the show back and have the CFL back in just a couple of days? Let me know that too down in the comments below. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, CFL 2024. So happy to be back. Can't wait to get this season rolling. Bring on the games starting on Thursday.